and cultural value to maintain water quality, provide habitat for wildlife, and increase resilience. And it's important to note that there are connections among these different outcomes associated with this goal related to water and land and people. On the next slide, we're illustrating that there are 4 key outcomes here that are going to be discussed today that are associated with this goal. And with this goal and among these outcomes, there's a common theme that what we do on the land impacts water quality and aquatic ecosystems. We live in a dynamic landscape here in the Chesapeake Bay watershed with constant alterations to the landscape due to our land use choices. These outcomes acknowledge that the need is there to not only restore the landscape, but also to prevent pollution and the impacts within the watershed. The actions that we propose are often non-regulatory in nature. I think that's a key point. For example, protection work almost exclusively deals with landowners that are willing and interested in protecting their land for conservation purposes. There is also more of a recognition that people are a part of these decisions, and that through this work, we can also meet the needs and desires of communities. And so together, this goal and its outcomes are part of a desire to elevate conservation within the partnership, which is inclusive of protection activities and long-term stewardship of the landscape, in addition to restoration. And like most prevention, some of those activities can be some of the most cost-effective solutions that we can engage in. So with, I think that's the last slide for me. And with those few words of introduction and context, I hope this was helpful to you. I'd like to now turn it over to Peter Claggett, who's going to walk us through the new land use decision support outcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So the land use decision support outcome, it's a new proposed outcome, but it's really an evolution of 2 other outcomes that were in and are currently in the 2014 Bay Agreement. The first of those is called the Land Use Options Evaluation Outcome, and it's a long description of it, but I've highlighted kind of the core elements of this outcome, which is to evaluate policy options, incentives, and planning tools, and to collate that information and provide it to those involved in the land use planning process. And through that, achieving a reduction in the rate of loss of agricultural lands, loss of forests, and loss of wetlands to development. And the other outcome is the land use methods and metrics outcome. These are the 2 land use outcomes in the 2014 agreement. And this outcome was really about tracking, developing data to monitor the landscape condition and track it over time. So developing local level metrics to characterizing the rate of farmland, forest, and wetland conversion, measuring the extent and rate of changes in impervious cover, things like roads, rooftops, parking lots. That's what we mean by impervious cover, and quantifying the impacts of those conditions and changes to water quality, healthy watersheds, and communities. Next slide. So the land use data, the first high resolution, to make this relevant to local decisions, the partnership developed 1 meter resolution land use land cover data. The first of this was finalized and released in 2022. And we just a couple of weeks ago released a new data set. It covers 3 dates in time from 2013 all the way up to 2021 at 1 meter resolution with 56 classes. And this is really a core product that can inform land use decisions across the entire watershed at all different scales. Next. And along with this is tracking change. So we're not just mapping the land use, land cover characteristics in an area, but we're tracking change over time. So here's an area that's actually Crozet, Virginia, showing from 2013 to 2021, all the changes on the landscape that occurred in that jurisdiction. And these data, again, are free to the public. They're going to be produced every 4 to 5 years. It's essentially a monitoring program for land use land cover change. Next. So that all has happened really recently, putting that data out there. It's only been in people's hands for a couple years, and it's already starting to inform a lot of decisions. And acknowledging that and understanding that, these two outcomes, the land use options evaluation, land use methods and metrics, are very tightly linked. We wanted to make that linkage even kind of more solid and essentially combined those two into a single outcome, which now is called the land use decision support outcome. It leverages and adds value to the land use data and monitoring by making the information relevant and actionable at the local and regional scale. Next. So this outcome is worded as develop and disseminate relevant and actionable land use information to organizations and communities involved in local and regional land use planning on past, present, and future conditions, and on the potential environmental and socioeconomic consequences of changing conditions. For this outcome to be successful, it's going to involve a lot of outreach to essentially some non-traditional partners, those engaged in land use decisions, should they be local governments, or NGOs or other groups at the local level, providing them information so that they can make the best decisions possible for their community. And through this process, we're going to be collecting use cases. We've already collected about 30 different use cases, and a lot of these use cases span the various outcomes under the Healthy Landscapes goal. So for example, identifying infrastructure at risk of flooding, or identifying forest and farmland conservation opportunities, locating where we have vacant or abandoned urban areas like urban lots, that could be opportunities for infill and redevelopment to reduce pressure on undeveloped lands outside the urban area. And then also to establish tree planting goals and monitoring success. So there's a wide variety of use cases. We want to collect those, we want to promote those, all part of this new outcome. That's the overview that Jeff and I have, and I don't know if there's time for questions.
So I haven't had any questions come in. If folks want to ask any, again, you can put them in the Q&A box. We'll pause for a moment and then move on. All right, we have one just came in. What happened to the Healthy Watersheds goal?
Well, that's a good question, Renee. And essentially, the Healthy Watershed goal is being kind of morphed into this healthy landscape goal. And the objectives of that, protecting healthy watersheds has been incorporated in several outcomes, including the protected lands outcome, which Sophie's going to talk about in a minute, and under the land use decision support outcome, as focusing on supporting land use decisions in healthy watersheds, and not just state identified healthy watersheds, but healthy watersheds kind of everywhere. And the Stream Health Work Group is charged with kind of identifying those healthy watersheds, kind of refining what the work that you started actually here at the Bay Program.
One more question that came in. What is the resolution? So it can identify lots that were vacant as of 2022. Will there be additional updates more frequently than every 5 years?
So these data, the high resolution 1 meter resolution data, so each cell is 1 by 1 meter, exist for 2013, 2017, and 2021/2022. So 3 dates in time. The next one's going to be 2025, 2026. We don't anticipate any more frequent than that. 4 to 5 years is kind of the sweet spot for identifying change at this resolution, and frankly, it's all we can afford.
Another question, what resources will be allocated to reaching local communities to share the tool and encourage participation?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that in terms of resources. We have other groups at the Bay Program, a local government advisory committee and a local leadership work group that are helping us identify venues where we can kind of reach a lot of people, um, and working with other organizations that do work. So we will be working with a bunch of other organizations that work directly and all the time with local planners and trying to empower them with information to kind of bring to the table just because there's few of us and there's very many of them.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter and Jeff. We will move on right now. Again, please ask your questions. We will have more time at the end. So thank you, and we will move on to Katie.
Great, thank you. I think my camera is disabled. Oh, there we go. Great, thanks everyone for attending today. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about our new Healthy Forests and Trees outcome in the revised watershed agreement. Let's go to the next slide. So this new Healthy Forests and Trees outcome is really built on two separate outcomes that were included in the 2014 watershed agreement. One was focused on urban and community tree canopy, which set a goal of achieving a net gain of 2,400 acres of urban tree canopy by 2025. And the other was focused on riparian forest buffers and set both a planting goal of 900 miles per year and a goal to achieve at least 70% riparian forest cover. Next slide. So when we started this whole process of revising the agreement, we worked with the forestry work group to revisit our existing outcomes and look at improvements that were needed, both to kind of the framing of the outcomes and to the numeric targets themselves. And so, I think both forest buffers and tree canopy are really recognized as keystone outcomes for the Bay program. They're really critical for water quality, but also provide a lot of important benefits for habitat and helping communities adapt to changing environmental conditions, among other things. And therefore really needed to be maintained in the agreement. They're also specific, measurable, and time-bound already, which is one of the things we were asked to review our indicators for. But some improvements were needed, and there are a lot of commonalities in terms of the improvements needed between forest buffers and tree canopy. Now that we have that really great high resolution land use land cover data and the change data that Peter was talking about, it's enabling us to see that there has been a lot of loss, both of forest buffers and of community tree canopy. And so, there's really a need, we recognize the need to further emphasize the importance of conservation, to move towards kind of achieving that goal of having a net gain. And that's going to require, good land use decisions and support for local government. So, the outcome that Peter is laid out is going to be really critical. And we've been working with Peter and his team on projects like tree canopy fact sheets and things like that to help support local governments in making good decisions. And that's going to continue to be a priority going forward. But the management board also directed us to establish more realistic, sorry, can you go back? Thank you. More realistic and achievable outcomes for both forest buffers and tree canopy. Although we have seen some nice increases in terms of the planting rates, we're not keeping up with the pace of loss. And so the work group wanted to take a look at historic planting rates to identify targets that would be achievable, but also still ambitious. And then we also identified a number of potential improvements to make our outcomes more directly relevant and easier to understand. So this involved things like shifting our language from urban to community tree canopy to be more inclusive of smaller communities that people may not think of as being urban. And so our original recommendation to the management board was just to update our two existing outcomes and make them better. Now, next slide. But stepping back, the watershed is about 60% forested, and then there's some additional land and developed tree cover, early successional natural areas. And most of that forested land is not within communities or riparian areas, but nonetheless provide a lot of benefits for water quality, habitats, and communities. And, there's recognition that we need to ensure that all of this forested land is conserved, managed, and stewarded to help ensure that they can stay as healthy, functioning forest ecosystems that will continue to provide the benefits that we rely on. Next slide. So the management board and the principal staff committee really challenged us to think bigger and consider whether a broader, more holistic outcome for forests could better enable us to achieve our watershed restoration goals. So the forestry work group kind of considered the pros and cons of doing this and having a broader outcome. I'd say there was a little concern about taking away focus from forest buffers and tree canopy, but also recognition of the potential benefits of enabling this broader consideration of forest conservation, elevating the need to manage and steward our existing forests, and the benefits of streamlining some of our processes. And so ultimately we decided that, establishing a broader outcome that could still maintain focus on restoring forest buffers and community tree canopy could be beneficial. Next slide. So this is where we landed. This broad outcome language up front calls for us to conserve and restore forests and tree cover throughout the watershed, but also to maintain that particular focus on riparian areas and communities. And so we have 3 what we call outcome targets under this bigger outcome. And in terms of framing for all 3 targets, we're planning to leverage that high resolution land use data Peter mentioned to detect losses, and to use the state reported BMP data to the Bay program to measure the gains achieved through tree planting, since that high res data is really better at detecting losses than it is at detecting like the baby trees that were just planted. And for all 3 targets, we set both long-term goals that are more in line with what we think is needed to achieve our watershed restoration goals, as well as shorter-term 10-year goals for 2035 that we think are more achievable in the short term. So we revised our outcome targets for tree canopy and forest buffers in line with the improvements that we identified for our existing indicators. So for tree canopy, our long-term goal is to achieve a net gain in canopy. And for forest buffers, the long-term goal is now to achieve 75% riparian forest cover. And so this is an increase from what we had before at 70%, which was always meant to be a floor, not a ceiling. And we think 75% is really what we should be stretching for based on stream health data, showing us that is what is needed kind of at a broad watershed-wide scale to support good stream health in the watershed. For tree canopy, we also established a new planting target for 2035, which wasn't previously, it wasn't included in the previous agreement. It was just kind of wrapped up in that sort of net gain goal, but the work group was interested in setting an explicit planting target. And for forest buffers, another change is that we're shifting away from miles to acres in our annual planting goal, since this is more in line with what the states are reporting to the Bay program. And that 7,500 acre per year goal is less than 900 miles per year to be more achievable. And then the last target here is a new target, and it's for forest conservation, which is really in line with what we were charged to do with this watershed agreement revision, to elevate conservation as kind of a key priority for the partnership. And so this new forest conservation target is kind of reflecting this expanded scope of the outcome. And it similarly sets a long-term goal to achieve a net gain in forests. And we're still working on a watershed-wide planting target. If we go to the next slide. So the work group is currently working on establishing this proposed numeric forest conservation target to be included in the revised watershed agreement by the end of the year is our objective. And so we're actually going to be talking about that at our August forestry work group meeting, and it is open if folks want to join. And we're going to be trying to consider all the revisions needed to the target based on the public feedback received as well as we work to finalize this. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. We did have one question that came in. I like that you added to each metric, reduce the loss. I'm curious to see how you see this changing the work that the workshop will advance.
The workshop, not sure what is meant by the workshop, but I think the reduce the loss piece was kind of embedded in the goals before, but the work group really wanted to put that, oh, the work group, okay, thank you. So we wanted to really put that up front, and as we work to develop our management strategies and work plans, we already did have some pieces built in previously about, conservation and trying to reduce loss, but I think putting it up front just reflects, a need to make this more of a priority going forward.
Just pause a moment, see if there's any other questions for Katie right now. Otherwise, we'll move on. And just remember, you can still type them. We'll take more at the end. And just a comment, appreciate the addition of maintenance.
Yes, maintenance is absolutely essential.
Well, thank you very much, Katie. So we'll move on, but again, still more questions. We'll take them at the end, and we will move on to Sophie.
Hi all, I'm Sophie Waterman, I'm with USGS, and today we're going to talk about our protected lands outcome. Let's start with the 2014 agreement, if you go to the next slide. So in our 2014 agreement, this was our original outcome. By 2025, protect an additional 2 million acres of land throughout the watershed. There's also those two sub goals within our outcome language related to wetlands and forested lands of high value. If you go to the next slide. We've met our 2014 goal, which is huge, which is really, really great. Go partnership. We have met that 2 million acre goal according to our preliminary data. Every 2 years, the Bay program does an indicator update to understand where we're at with our protected lands. And according to our 2024, which we're still kind of in the process of finalizing, we have made it. Once we have those final protected lands for 2024, we can dig into those sub goals a little bit more to understand where we're at with those two goals. But the overarching goal has been met, which is pretty exciting, considering that there's all sorts of things happening in the world, and good news is good news. So next slide. That means that we need to update our goal, that we can't just say, we'll continue it because we've met it with that 2 million acre target. So we need to continue our work and move into this world of being a little bit more strategic and a little bit focused to ensure that we're supporting all aspects of this kind of overall healthy landscape goal. So as we move forward, we want to ensure that our protected lands outcome and goal focuses on wetlands, forests, ag lands, tribal lands, and this urban and community lands kind of aspect, which are new parts of the agreement and new parts of the goal. This is big. This is a big thing to try and be a part of. A bigger, more interconnected goal. And so we'll have a lot of work to do between now and whenever we decide, I think it's 2035 or 2040, to move forward with a new goal. So what does that look like? What have we proposed? What we put out there? If you want to go to the next slide. This is our current language for targets, and I apologize I didn't put the outcome language on there, but the outcome is to protect critical landscapes within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, to protect water quality, enhance biodiversity, to support sustainable livelihoods, ensure military readiness and national defense, and honor cultural heritage. And so to do that, we have these proposed targets. So our first one is just another broad protected lands goal, which will either be in the 1.5 to 2 million acre range, another forest goal to protect a certain amount of forested acres, another wetland goal, and then we have the watershed health, tribal lands, agricultural lands, and community green space, which are new additions to the protected lands outcome and targets. We have this emphasis on ensuring that we are protecting lands that critical to the livelihood and the sustainability of the watershed. You'll note there's a bunch of X's in all of these. The work group has decided to take some time to really dig into what those acres are going to be, instead of just putting a number that's unrealistic or just pulled out of thin air. We want to ensure that these acre targets are realistic and actually achievable. So over the next year or so, we will be taking some time to really dig in and define those targets. Let me just check my notes real quick to make sure I've touched on everything. I just, again, with the targets, we want to ensure that they're achievable goals. Like, this is a big thing to kind of chew on, and we want to make sure that we as a partnership can actually achieve goals. Achievable goals are more beneficial in the sense that it feels better to achieve a goal, right? But also setting lofty goals, it can set unrealistic expectations of what we can actually do within a 10 to 15 year time period. So next slide. What does the forward look like for continuing to develop this outcome and these targets? Like I said, we're going to work with the Protected Lands work group along with experts, do some analysis and talk with folks about what can we actually do, and follow the SMART goal frame of so specific, measurable, achievable, and time bound. We want to make sure we can actually accomplish these things and are biting off the appropriate amount, but also moving this work forward, right? So there's a wide range of things that we're striving for, that we're utilizing to move the work forward, but we also want to make sure that we can try and achieve. So over the next 2 years or so, we will be developing those specific targets, but the language is pretty much there. I will say, as you are all listening to this, as you know, that the period for comment is open, and we really encourage, the work group really encourages to put in comments related to our language specifically, ask questions, provide comments on what you would like to see from these things, as will help kind of shape the future of this outcome and goal. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Sophie. Yeah, one question that has come in. Do you envision the new data and analysis being used to include in your land preservation target the following factors: development pressure, I'm not going to pronounce this right, contiguous and key contributions to preservation success, such as local rural zoning and preservation performance? You can't buy it all, so it matters how well other tools and policies and partners are also contributing to the effort.
Yeah, that's going to play a big role in the target numbers. So those things will play a role in terms of like what's actually feasible for us to conserve within this, time period. And then as a program, setting priority areas, right? So if you've got areas that are of high value, after we kind of go through this process of analysis and talking with folks of, these are priority areas to communities, right, within our community green space fund. That will help with the on the ground work, but it also will help with the overall setting of targets. So what's actually happening on the land, and what is feasible for us as a partnership, what number is feasible for us to put forward for that 10 to 15 year period of time. So yes, those things will be considered and looked at and ingested as we go through this process to ensure that we're being realistic, and we're also trying to meet the need of conservation and protection within the watershed. Good question. Any other questions?
Thanks, Sophie. Nothing at the moment. We'll wait just a few minutes. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move on.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, actually, one more question just came in if you want to jump back on.
Yeah.
Are you considering creating a mapping tool to help determine how well all the goals are being met?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I should have emphasized that. These goals will be used as an indicator in the next 10 to 15 years. We will be tracking these things. We'll be using the high resolution land cover to track a portion of this. And we'll be, every 2 years, I think is the goal, is to continue that every 2 year time frame to ensure that we are, on track, or understand why we aren't on track, et cetera. The goal, the hope is that we'll continue those indicator updates, and they'll be more specific. It won't just be general protected lands within each of those targets. And then this also comes into a bigger question of data and getting states and jurisdictions their data in a way that's easy for us to update and ingest. So there's a whole data component to this as well, but the tracking and mapping of it will absolutely be happening and is a really important part to this as we understand, how this impacts communities and health and what's happening with the landscape. How is this impacting what's happening across this whole healthy watershed goal, but also other things that this touches. So our habitats and our water quality, these things all are interconnected, and so tracking is going to be really crucial in the communication aspect of it, but also just to understand that we are making a dent from the goals that we set. Another great question.
Thanks so much, Sophie. And just a reminder, folks should continue to ask your questions and we will get to them again at the end. Otherwise, I'm happy to move on and introduce Julie.
Thanks, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending today and your interest in our outcomes under the Healthy Landscapes goal. My name is Julie Reichert-Wynn, and I'm a natural resources specialist. And here at the Chesapeake Bay program, I help coordinate our efforts to advance how we adapt to changing environmental conditions. Today, I will be going over the updated adaptation outcome in the draft of the revised Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. Next slide. So the adaptation outcome in the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement read, continually pursue, design, and construct restoration and protection projects to enhance resiliency of the Chesapeake Bay and aquatic ecosystems from the impacts of coastal erosion, coastal flooding, more intense and more frequent storms, and sea level rise. So this language was interesting and has had some challenges in trying to track progress for our work group. So currently the adaptation outcome sits under the scientific technical assessment and reporting team, and the climate resiliency work group served as a science support work group to try to advance this adaptation outcome. But the challenge was that there was some vagueness in what was meant by restoration and protection projects and how do we measure enhanced resiliency. But there was also this outcome language was limiting in the fact that it focused on coastal impacts only. And we have a lot of adaptation and resilience needs across the watershed in both tidal and non-tidal areas. Next slide. So that led our work group and various stakeholders who were involved in helping us develop this updated adaptation outcome to really focus in on what could we actually achieve, bringing all of us together collectively to advance adaptation, and how can we do it in such a way that we could measure progress. And so that led to us wanting to focus on capacity building in the new outcome language. We also want to be more specific and focus in on nature-based solutions. And with nature-based solutions, we've heard some of them actually in some of the previous presentations, but that's really looking at how do we utilize living shorelines, large-scale marsh restoration, oysters, forest conservation, and stream restoration. How do we leverage those practices and that conservation efforts to really allow for us to balance long-term resiliency across the watershed and its communities, economies, and ecosystems. So we wanted to be a little bit more specific on what we were going to focus on, and we felt that collectively we could come together to help increase the capacity in pursuing these solutions. Now it's going to be a little bit different how we're structured. We are going to be, as you can see, moving into the Healthy Landscapes goal. And also the fact that our outcome was just called adaptation was a little unclear too. Adaptation to what? So we changed the name to Adapting to Changing Environmental Conditions. Next slide. So we also included in this updated adaptation outcome language some measurable targets. So that was really important to us. And in order to make it measurable, the stakeholders in the work group came up with that we needed a place-based approach. And so you'll see in this target language, we have also some time-bound goals as well, but it also focuses on looking at at least seven sub-watershed areas. And we also wanted to make sure we added value. And so where we thought we could add value would be through knowledge sharing and technical assistance to identify adaptation options with these nature-based solutions. And again, these solutions can include restoration, protection projects, or conservation efforts, and it will help address risks to people, infrastructure, and habitats from changes in temperature, precipitation, and landscapes. And we also have a target that we wanted our work group activities to inform and lead to increase in the implementation of these adaptation strategies that integrate these nature-based solutions within the above sub-watershed areas. So it was important to our work group that we were, again, adding value. So we wanted to make sure the activities we were engaging in and that we were allowing these sub-watershed areas to benefit from this knowledge sharing and technical assistance, that we're going to be leading to this increase in these adaptation strategies in these areas that will be selected. And there's one other point I want to make too. What's really different about this than from our previous outcome and the way we're going to structure is that it's going to really focus on the sort of increased engagement across the practitioners in these areas and also local engagement. So that's going to be sort of a not entirely new area for our work group, because we have done collaborative efforts with like the local leadership work group and the local government advisory committee, but it's something we're going to have to think through. And we have heard a lot of interest from the states to be involved in help selecting the 7 sub-watershed areas that we're going to focus these adaptation efforts. Next slide. So we're not starting from scratch. Good news. So we have a current adaptation portfolio that we feel we can leverage as we move forward with this updated outcome. Currently, the work group has focused a lot on various community resilience projects, but in such a way where we have supported partner projects that identify the best practices for community engaged adaptation. So while our work group itself wasn't directly working on this, we were bringing everyone together who worked on these best practices, and through our combined expertise was able to help them form this guidance. So we really see we can leverage this guidance. And really with this adaptation portfolio, we can see how this can connect to the healthy landscapes goal. So with that community resilience example, that is really connecting with that economic and cultural value as we look at these adaptation options. We also do a lot of work in marsh adaptation, and this is actually kind of fits the place-based model that we're trying to do, but we're going to expand it out to more of the watershed. But this effort, our work group was directly involved with, where we were collaborating with different states, agencies, with Virginia and Maryland to identify marsh restoration and protection opportunities with changing sea level. And this really connected to the healthy landscapes goal in advancing water quality, habitat, and ecological value. And we feel we can really use sort of this place-based strategy that we use in this marsh adaptation work to help inform how we go about selecting areas for this bigger scope in these sub-watershed areas. We also support research on nature-based solution performance under changing conditions. So it's really important to elevate our ability to understand how well these nature-based solutions are doing in minimizing risk and impacts from changing conditions. And so we do support proposal development and collaborative projects across our work group for nature-based solutions. That's really capturing that resilience piece. And we see us continuing to leverage these successes that our work group has, but we're going to connect this back into the healthy landscapes. And that brings me to my next slide. So this is the overarching vision. So again, we want to expand our thinking on adaptation across these 3 zones in the watershed. So we have our landward zone, and we have our transition zone, and our waterward zone. So most of our work so far has focused in on the waterward zone and the transition zone. We want to build in those non-tidal areas in the landward zone. And we want to look at these natural and nature-based solutions within these zones and how we can implement them, for instance, in the landward zone, and how could that benefit the watershed as a whole in the waterward zone. And so we feel like this is a sort of a good roadmap of what we're trying to accomplish, but we can't accomplish this alone. As you can see, a lot of these nature-based solutions, when we look at forest buffers, stream restoration, restoring the floodplain connectivity, there's suburban and urban practices up in the watershed, around bioretention basins. We're going to need expertise within our goal team here, the people we heard present today, and also their successes will lead to our successes. And same with other goal teams that are being developed here in the new revised watershed agreement, the thriving habitats and wildlife. So working with the wetland work group, working with our oyster folks, because a lot of these nature-based solutions can involve oyster reef restoration, can involve island ecosystem restoration and natural breakwaters using oyster structures, and also looking at tidal marsh migration. But as you can see, if we look across the landscape, what we're doing in the waterward zone is going to provide protection for our nearshore environments and for our shorelines from erosion. That will help protect more of those inland areas. We're also going to have to deal with coastal flooding from rising sea levels and how we're going to address that with our landscape change. So the land use decision support outcome is going to be very important as we look at that, but also what we do up in this non-tidal area in the nature-based solutions. Forest conservation is going to be so important for resilience. The shading from the trees and the stream restoration really help us deal with these warming temperatures and the increased precipitation that we're going to be seeing, and how that affects the how we're going to address flooding in the watershed, and that's affecting our communities. And so with all of this, it's ambitious, but the main goal is to bring it all together and see across these sub-watershed areas, how can we leverage all these practices and expertise and these natural resource goals to really enhance resilience in the landscape. Next slide. I'm going to end here. I just want to let folks know we have an office hour scheduled for July 28th from noon to 1 p.m. that if you have further questions or want more discussion around this adapting to changing environmental conditions outcome, please join us. The link here goes to the main calendar page for the Chesapeake program. You just go to that date and click on our event, and that will have all the login information. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Julie. I have one question that's coming for you, but I'll also invite all the other panelists to come back on screen. And just a reminder for folks that please ask your questions. We have about a solid 10 minutes, so I'm happy to answer what we can. So Julie, the question I have for you is, how will you be incorporating Indigenous knowledge in this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know the Scientific Technical Advisory Committee has been leading a lot of efforts to try to think about this. And there was at one point a proposed sort of foundational goal where we try to look at these other knowledge sources. And so we're going to have to rely on some expertise to help us sort that out. But where I can see where I'm envisioning where we can kind of look into that, we do want to have a lot of engagement as we're trying to select these 7 sub-watershed areas. So working with our partners who engage with tribes and trying to see how we can integrate that knowledge could be a good avenue that we could explore and look into in this.
Thank you, Julie. And one more for you. Might you consider adaptation indicators that involve well-vetted economics or insurance? Rising home insurance premiums are a function of disaster risk. Perhaps there are insights out there already to say that if an area has been protected from sea level rise and flooding, we actually see such protections translate into tangible benefits.
Yeah, that's a great question. We will have to come together as a work group and reach out to various expertise. So again, as I mentioned, we are expanding. So right now our work group is made up of coastal resiliency, practitioners and scientists, because we were under that science support team. So there is going to be some effort in recruiting and sort of seeing who do we need at the table and where do we need, what expertise we need as we move forward. So I think that's a great idea for indicators, because we do want to connect it back to what we have in our goal or in our outcome language about connecting this work to that long-term resiliency of communities, economies, and ecosystems. So really thinking about that insurance piece and having better land use decisions around coastal flooding and with rising sea levels, and then also looking at floodplain connectivity. Like, is there an impact in how we see how these insurance values? I mean, that is a very interesting approach to take. It's one we have not taken in the past, but it's something I'm definitely going to make a note of, because I think these are some creative ideas we're going to be looking for as we move forward with this updated outcome once it's the new watershed agreement's approved.
Thanks, Julie. Peter, I'm actually going to ask you this question that came in the chat just so everybody can hear it and the answer you gave. But going back to what you presented on, someone had asked about, could you provide any examples of local change planning and zoning based on the analysis that you've been working on?
Sure. I think the couple examples I gave there in my written response were, one, the Delaware Office of State Planning and Coordination is using our land use change forecasts, which are generated by our land change model, and that model is parameterized using the high resolution data that we've created. So we basically forecasted urbanization over the next several decades across the state of Delaware. And their Office of State Planning is using that information to inform transportation decisions and also to inform land use policies at the county level. We're working with the counties to do that. Then the data have also been used by the state of Maryland to reauthorize the Forest Conservation Act. And there are about 30 other use cases across the watershed by different groups. A lot of those aren't planning specific, but they're more focused on stormwater, climate adaptation, or forest conservation.
Thank you so much, Peter. So just wait a minute. Currently no other questions, but invite folks to please type anything that you want to ask of our panelists in the Q&A box. We'll just give it a few seconds.
Hey, Rachel, could I make a kind of a follow-up comment?
Of course, Jeff, go ahead.
So I like the question that Julie just fielded, and also the question to Peter. And I think maybe there's a broad comment there about how all of the things that we've proposed here, so this new agreement, the new goals, the new outcomes, modifications, et cetera, they're all going to suggest that maybe we should be doing things a little bit differently than we have been. And that may affect the composition of our goal teams and our work groups and who participates and so forth. So I do think whether it's engaging the insurance industry or whether it's engaging the planning community more, et cetera, these are all things that we're going to have to be thinking about as well. And now is a great opportunity, and now is a good time for us to be thinking about that and who else should be part of these conversations. But at the same time, I think we're really interested in getting to more implementation. So how do we figure out who to engage, not overwhelm them with meetings, and somehow get the best advice and thoughts about this so that we can get to more implementation on the ground. I really think that's where we would like to go. And so again, invite people to think about not just commenting on the agreement, but maybe also who else you think should be involved, or if you think that you could play a role through the organization that you represent or agency you represent. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Sophie, if you're still there, I've got a question for you. Who established the 2040 date for protected lands? What was the rationale for that date? And how are the goals established and allocated among the states?
Yeah, so the management board did not give us like a set date. It's like 2035, 2040. 2040 was picked by the work group prior to me taking over as coordinator. So that's where that like number came from. We wanted to keep the 10 to 15 year, or I guess 15 year kind of timing. If we are given a specific date, I think that will be taken into consideration with the target. So the date was just kind of pooled in terms of the way that we operated in the past and how we plan to operate in the future. And when it comes to state allocation stuff, that has not been discussed on like how it will be broken out. Historically, we've not broken it out by state of like what each state is trying to accomplish. It's more of the whole watershed-wide partnership goal. That's why it's so important with the tracking to understand where we're protecting, to ensure that we are protecting equitably across the watershed. We are kind of moving into this world of defining the targets and the actual numbers, and jurisdictions are a part of those conversations and are crucial in making those decisions of what is the actual acreage number that we want to go forth with. So we're talking with experts, we're doing internal work of analysis and then talking internally with experts, but also reaching out to folks who work within jurisdictions on what they see as realistic and plausible to set those numbers. I hope that answers your question.
And the only other thing that popped up was just thank you all. These were some great presentations. So I don't have any other questions. So Bianca, you want to come on and just close us out?
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today. We do want to let you know that we do have one more webinar in this Beyond 2025 webinar series. It's going to be next week on July 30th, and we're going to be talking about the final proposed goal for the Watershed Agreement, which is going to be the Engaged Communities goal. So we do hope you can all join us. The link to that is on the Chesapeake Bay Program's meeting calendar to register there. And we'll also be sending out a follow-up email for all the registrants for this webinar that will also include a link to register for that one as well. And if you missed any of the previous ones, they will also be on the YouTube channel along with this one in a couple of days. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you to all of our speakers for these wonderful presentations.
Thanks very much.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
Thank you.